Hello, friends, and welcome to the April 5th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about the public policy process here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Adnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. And I do want to start today with a couple of quick announcements. Last week, we announced 3 sign-on letters for Texans of Faith, one supporting the George Floyd Act, another supporting voting rights, and a third on Medicaid expansion. And this week, we are announcing a brand new sign-on letter talking specifically about the voter suppression bills that were passed last week. We're going to be highlighting those in an event that will take place at the Texas Capitol this Wednesday, April 7th from 11 o'clock until 2 o'clock. Go to texasimpact.org/elections for the sign-on letter and registration for that event. If you have questions or if you're a faith leader interested in speaking at that event, please email me at scott@texasimpact.org. He says, recognizing that now his phone will be blowing up for the rest of this recording. So we're going to be talking much more about voting later in this episode during the legislative update and action alert sections. But today we are excited because we're going to be focusing on climate justice as our focus of the week, and specifically talking about climate legislation at the federal level. For that conversation, we'll be joined shortly by Ruth Ivory-Moore, Program Director of Environment and Corporate Social Responsibility with Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. But before that, and before the action alert and the legislative update, I am honored to welcome to the conversation today Bishop Erik Gronberg. Bishop Gronberg was elected by the Northern Texas, Northern Louisiana Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America in 2016. Prior to his election, he had served as a lead pastor of Trinity Lutheran Church in Fort Worth. But I usually skip over this part of his bio, but it seems very relevant today, that Bishop Gronberg graduated from Harvard University with a bachelor's degree in environmental science and public policy. So that should serve our conversation well today. So Bishop Gronberg, thank you so much for the time today. I really hope you enjoyed your Easter holiday, and the floor is now yours for this week's Weekly Word.
Thanks, Scott. It's a privilege to be with you all. And yes, this is a topic that is important in my life and has been important. And what a blessing to have Ruth with us representing the work that we do as the ELCA in these areas. And so what a joy. Happy Easter. I pray everyone had a wonderful Easter and this continued challenges that we face in the pandemic. But it was a joyful Easter in my household, and I pray it was for you as well. When I think of creation care, when I think of the creation, my mind always goes to Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world, and those who live in it. Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world, and those who live in it. The first thing we are called to recognize when we talk about creation justice, climate justice, is that this is God's earth, God's creation, not ours. And that is so important for us, particularly us as humans, but also as Western Americans, to recognize that this is not ours, it is God's. And we confess that when we say in the Apostles' Creed, I believe in God the Father, creator of heaven and earth. And in the Nicene Creed, when we add to that, of all that is, seen and unseen, this is God's. In our tradition, we often go to the Small Catechism to Martin Luther, and Luther talks about the Apostles' Creed. He talks about that first article, and he says, God has created me and all that exists, including those things needed for daily life. And he includes in that a list, a long list, including food, clothing, home, family, work, fields, and even cattle. God has created so that we might have life. And then again, in his explanation to the fourth petition of the Lord's Prayer, Luther talks about daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. What is daily bread? But all the things we need, including bread, but also family and friends and good weather. And Luther put this in for good measure for us with kids, obedient children, peace and health, good government. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. If we believe that God has created everything, and we confess that we are God's creation as well, then we are to steward that creation, not just for our benefit, but for our neighbors. We know that climate change is a reality. Every major corporation, the Department of Defense, all credible climate scientists agree it is happening and it is a current and present reality. And it is impacting us and our neighbors, particularly our poorest neighbors. So we have a duty to speak out and expect good government, good policy as part of our daily bread. An expectation that we should be able to do something about the damage that we are causing. The reality is that's going to require changes in how we do business, particularly how we produce and consume energy. And that makes people nervous because there's uncertainty, and nervousness creates fear, and particularly in an energy state like Texas. But the reality is businesses, industries are already changing faster, frankly, than our policymakers. This isn't a partisan issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It is a creation issue. And if we confess as people of faith that God is the creator, that the earth is the Lord's and all that is in us, then we have a duty to advocate, to speak and to act, to help preserve and enhance God's creation, to protect our neighbor, and to show appreciation for God for that which we receive. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you all, and I really look forward to what Ruth has to bring to us.
Well, thank you, Bishop. That definitely sets the table for the next conversation that we're going to be having today. So really appreciate the time and for the ministry that you're doing each and every day. So he did introduce Ruth well. Today we are definitely going to have a Lutheran flair. As I mentioned, our next speaker today is Ruth Ivory-Moore, who is the Program Director for Environment and Corporate Social Responsibility with the ELCA. She's had careers in chemical engineering as a corporate legal counsel and brings legal specialties, including environmental law and climate change, to our conversation today. So Ruth, I am really thankful for you taking the time today and looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it seems like a lot of the climate talk in DC right now is focused on the president's infrastructure plan. So can you talk us through kind of where that infrastructure plan stands, where we are, and what the next steps are in that process?
Yes, the infrastructure plan is really just that right now, a plan. It's a proposal by the president. It's not legislation yet. The plan was introduced by the president last Wednesday, and it's called the American Jobs Plan. It's a true $1 trillion, 8-year infrastructure plan aimed at accelerating the U.S. energy transition. It contains major energy infrastructure funding, as well as notable environmental justice concerns. The plan encompasses far more than just transportation, public facilities, and power supply, both in terms of scope and the number of government programs that it would create. It seeks, among other efforts, to boost the EV, electrical vehicle market, improve energy efficiency, promote carbon capture retrofits, expand broadband access, direct for climate research funding to historically Black colleges. And it targets 40% of the benefits of climate and clean infrastructure to disadvantaged communities. It also targets money to the agriculture sector. It goes to look at repairing crumbling bridges, small roadways, those things that as agriculture has become much more advanced, it goes to be able to reconnect the rural communities with the rest of the world via broadband. So which is important for helping our agriculture. It looks into a number of different things related to water, related to other infrastructure. So, and the biggest issue we have that the president is going to face with this bill is that it is costly. It's about $2.3 trillion and how they're going to pay for it. As part of that plan, they also introduce a tax plan too. So they're hoping that they'll be able to pay for this via a tax plan, which you call Made in America tax plan. So I'll stop right there, but it's a very comprehensive plan that does require, or that will address some climate justice issues, will also address other issues far beyond that related to schools and a lot of different other areas too.
It sounds like there's a lot there's certainly a lot in this plan. when most of us hear infrastructure plan, we think about the like roads and bridges piece of that, right? You know, we've had the joke for years about Infrastructure Week, trying to focus on transportation and those type issues. But I think it's helpful for us to think about this infrastructure plan in terms of also, like, all of those things are important, but also thinking about this infrastructure plan in terms of the climate justice piece. And so it sounds like you are feeling as though this infrastructure plan could also largely be considered a climate plan, or at least a chunk of it, right?
A significant, not, I would probably say probably over 50% of that will. It integrates initiatives that reflect President Biden's campaign promises on environmental justice. It would provide about 40% of the benefits of climate and clean infrastructure investments to disadvantaged communities. And it aligns the administration's Justice 40 initiative with his January 27th executive order on tackling climate crisis at home and abroad. Just to give you a few specific provisions of the environmental justice provision, it will provide $621 billion in transportation resilience infrastructure, $16 billion for plugging orphan and gas wells and cleaning up abandoned wells, restoring the Superfund tax fund for the first time since 1995, helping to pay for cleanup of hazardous waste sites. $5 billion to reduce, to remediate and redevelop brownfield superfunds. $45 billion going to improvement in drinking water. $56 billion in grants and low-cost flexible loans to support modernization of drinking, wastewater, and stormwater system. It will also address and remediate what we call PFAS, which stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances in drinking water that have come from a number of entities like cleaning, like cleaners, stores, or like that. And that's become significant because those PFAS chemicals can stay within the water in a definite amount of time. So it comes with money to do that. But it also includes like upgrades to like public schools, privatization of indoor and air ventilation system. And as we know, what COVID-14 has taught us, that ventilation system can be significant. It also targets job creation and creation, I guess, even though the meat is not on the bones yet, but something that's called the Civilian Climate Corps. I don't think I would say it's exactly like the Peace Corps, but very similar to what the Peace Corps does. So it really is comprehensive. And like I said before, it addresses a lot of issues that our farmers need, from water, those crumbling roads. It is intended to have something for everybody. And then also it safeguards critical infrastructure for those communities who are most impacted by climate change.
Thanks. So let's circle back to the price tag, because I know that's going to be, something that gets a lot of attention. So help Texans of Faith understand how these costs could be paid. I know you mentioned that there were some taxes that would be associated with it. And help us think through what our faith says about spending for the common good.
Yeah, that is going to be probably the biggest hurdle this administration is going to have to overcome. As I said, they did also introduce, as part of that, Made in America tax plan. The key provisions, and again, these are plans, there are no legislative bills yet put together, but the key provisions of that plan would include corporate tax proposals in support of his ambitious infrastructure plan that would raise $2 trillion over 15 years. It also includes something which is fairly new, an international tax net that would apply to corporations operating in low tax jurisdiction. And the purpose of that part of the plan would be to prevent US companies from leaving production facilities in the US to go external to other areas internationally to produce where there's a lower tax place. Matter of fact, Secretary Yellen was out the end of last week advocating for that. It will be a long road ahead for the president to get this done. He still insists that the plan will not increase taxes on individuals earning less than $400,000. The plan does reverse or modify certain provision of the previous administration's 2017 Tax Cut and Job Act that was passed under former President Trump. And the corporate tax would go from 21% to 28%. And the global minimum tax on U.S. multinational corporation, a 21% minimum tax on domestic corporation, will be calculated on a country-by-country basis. As you can see, it is a very complicated plan that he's put out. There were also incentives there for job incentives, for domestic job incentives, like deductions for offshoring of jobs would be denied, but a tax credit would be in support of onshoring jobs. So there's a green slant to it. Fossil fuel preferences would be eliminated. Superfund payments would be reinstated. And this would be furthering of President Biden's 2050 goal of net zero. Internal Revenue Service would be funded. And so there's a lot here. And to say that it's going to be an uphill battle is probably one of the biggest understatement I can make at this point.
Yeah. So what's your messaging on that, right? Like, first of all, I think a lot of people from my church would be hearing no tax increases on folks under 400,000 and feel, a little better about that. But as somebody who works for an institution of faith, why is it important that we make these investments for climate justice?
Well, as if we go back to our 1993 social statement, we know that, and as Bishop Gronberg stated, we are stewards of creation. And being stewards of, and we know that climate change is real. We know, and then from every administration in the recent years, even the Trump administration, they have put out documents. Research shows that, human beings have caused acceleration in global warming of the temperature. So what we are doing in the way we live right now is that we are causing the global temperature of the world to increase. And as the Paris Agreement was put in place in 2015 and went into force in 2016, the US did back out effective November of last year, but we're now back in. The Paris Agreement was put in place to make sure that we keep temperatures below 2 degrees centigrade. Now, with that said, now we have data from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a United Nations research arm that does work for United Nations research on climate change, that says that we have to keep the temperature to 1.5. So when you look at, our social statement, embraces science, embraces the creative wisdom that God imparted to us. So when we look at the science, we look at what our responsibilities are to the earth. We look at the fact that we are charged with tilling the land, with taking care of creation. But then we have an obligation to address the degradation that's being caused to the earth. If we go back to Hurricane Harvey, we go back, because that's what happened to Houston and other areas in Texas. We look at what Maria has done. We look at places like Puerto Rico, and almost every state has been touched by climate. Every state has been touched by climate change in one way or another. It may not be a hurricane as in Texas. It could be wildfires. Last year we had the largest wildfires in California, but not only, and every year we're hearing that this is the largest wildfire. So, how large do wildfires have to get? And not only that, but Oregon, the other states of the West, we're seeing this wildfire. And then when you go to the Midwest, we're seeing flooding and or droughts. Go to the East Coast, because of sea level rise, cities like Miami, Norfolk, Virginia, those are cities that there will come a time where those who are living on the coast will not be able to live there because of climate change. And when you look at the 2018 report from the former Trump administration, it talks about how climate change is impacting everyone, not only our daily lives, but also trade. It's going to have an economic impact upon us. So as stewards of creation, being Lutheran, we have a responsibility to address the degradation that human beings, mankind is causing. Now, with that said, we know that there has to be a just transition. And by that, what I mean, we have to make sure that we leave no one behind. We need to make sure that the most vulnerable who are impacted are taken care of. The marginalized are taken care of. But not only that, we do not want to increase that most vulnerable or marginalized corporate subset of folks. We also want to make sure that those who are in the fossil fuel industry, the energy sector, are not left behind. That when we make this transition so that they can have good jobs, good work that can take care of their families. So it's important to us to not look at this holistically, but look at this not to look at this very segmentedly, but look at it holistically so that we can assure that whatever legislation, whatever regulation, whatever policies are in place, they take care of everyone. And so I know that climate change has become partisan, and like Bishop Gronberg said, it should not be partisan, but it has been. So we've got to find a way to find language to resonate and find out what happened. Find out how we can touch people where they are and help them to understand. So the biggest thing I think we can do is to help people become educated, understand where they are, with the understanding that what is needed in Odessa, Texas, is going to be different than what's needed in Yale, Virginia, or in Bismarck, North Dakota. So it is a very complicated situation we have, but we know through the creative wisdom that God has imparted upon us, and also through the fact that we do understand science, that it is our responsibility as stewards of creation to make sure we put in place plans that will address all these concerns.
Yes, I'm interested. I think you did a really good job of talking about both the importance of stewardship of creation, but also the idea of just transition and making sure that folks are taken care of. The administration's touting the job creation pieces of this plan as well. And so do you feel like they're striking that balance of creation plus just transition and job creation?
I think the intent is there, and the intent is very strong. I think that is definitely the intent. But what needs to happen is we have got to get, and I'll be honest, this is what I see is missing right now. We have got to get the grassroots, the people on the ground, involved with the plan going forward. Because we cannot continue with the top-down approach. We've got to be to listen to the people on the ground. I do know back in 2017, when we visited some folks in North Dakota, and they told us a significant issue was with one of the policies or one of the regulations put in place related to the Clean Water Act, was that the administration did not come out and talk to the people. They did not get the input from the farmers. And I know when the administration puts out and says, well, they passed a regulation or Congress has passed a specific piece of legislation, they put out there for comments, they welcome your comments, but there's got to be a way to reach back. There's got to be better outreach. And that's one thing that we're trying to do, particularly with ELCA's advocacy at this point, is to make sure that the voices of the people on the ground, the expertise that they have, is incorporated. Now, what needs to happen and what will happen by April 23rd, very close to now, is that the US is sponsoring a global summit. It's led by the US, and the purpose of that summit is, number one, the US should be announcing very close to the 23rd, I should say 22nd, or soon before, its intention to what it's going to put forth as its goal for reducing climate change from a U.S. perspective. It's commitments. And we call that ambition. They're going to increase their target ambition. When they do that, some of the work is going on now in what that target is going to be. When that's announced close to the 22nd, that would be a very high level ambition, very high level. Between April 24th and I should say November 1st, that's when we're going to have to be putting meat on the bones of those ambitions, like how the U.S. is going to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. We need to make sure that we get the voices of people at the table that are not being addressed right now.
So let me ask this, second to last question. What do you hope folks who are listening today will do? What's a homework assignment you'd leave with them?
Become educated. If you have questions, contact the ELC Advocacy Office. Contact me. There will be a lot of misinformation out there. And what I would ask you to do, I don't care if my mailbox just explodes. I'd rather for you to talk to me and to find out what the real issues are. I know that, when the Biden administration put out, even on January 27th, there were some concerns about the executive orders. Now we have more of a plan. This plan needs to go through Congress right now. And chances are it's not going to be one bill that's going to get it through. There'll be numerous bills that'll be shepherding through. And what we will do will be following each bill, and the bills will have so many different parts to it. So if anyone has any questions, have any concerns, please contact us. But also understand if what someone is saying, if it makes sense. Our goal is to make sure no one is left behind. Whether you're in a marginalized or vulnerable community, or whether you're an industry, if you're working, and me coming from, I work for ExxonMobil, so I am very much attuned, and I understand that we have stood on the backs of the folks in the fossil fuel industry for so long. They provided the energy that runs this country, and there's no way we can leave them behind. So main thing, get educated, contact us if you have questions.
All right, so last question, shameless plugs. Where can we find you, or anything else you want to leave with us today?
Okay, my email address is Ruth.Ivory-Moore @elca.org. Just send me an email. Phone number is 202-794-2163, or just go to elca.org/resources and then click on advocacy, and you find lots of resources there.
All right, well, Ruth, really appreciate the time today, and thank you for the work you're doing on behalf of, let's say, Lutherans and also people of faith throughout the country. So thank you so much for your ministry and for the time today. Appreciate you.
Thanks a lot. Enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. All right, really enjoyed that conversation. Next up, we will welcome Josh Houston to the conversation for this week's Legislative Update and Action Alert. And he needs no introduction to you all, but I'll just note that I've probably spent more time late in the evening over the course of the last week with Josh than, people in my own family. So Josh, it's good seeing you again.
Yeah, it's good seeing you. I spent many wee hours of the morning with you and not my wife. So that's that's a terrible way to start in.
We'll leave it there. Summer's coming. Maybe we'll have a vacation this summer if we're not called back into special. But let's go ahead and catch people up. Last week was a very busy week. What happened?
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that if we're successful, we're going to force a special session, but probably in all likelihood. But so last week was just voting rights galore, and that seems to be what's for dinner for the next 2 months, and hopefully more if we do our jobs right. But yeah, I know what Scott and I are talking about is the extremely long nights we had. Let's start off on Wednesday over on the Senate side. Senate Bill 7 cleared the Senate. Technically, it was Thursday morning when it cleared. But on about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Senate went to the floor, and I think they reached the bill, Senate Bill 7, sometime around dinner. And then that debate went on to, what was it, Scott? I think, did you stay up for all of it?
I've now lost track of time. I think I stayed up for all of that one. I'll just remind folks because some of us, Josh, don't have all these numbers memorized. And I'm on calls and saying numbers. So Senate Bill 7, the bad voter suppression bill in the Senate.
Yeah, Scott, you're going to help me out because I've been way in the weeds on this for a very long time. So Senate Bill 7 was the great big omnibus bill. You had an action alert about it last week. There were at least 16 ways it could affect you. And now I got to go, there's going to be an action alert, but it's going to come out late because one of the things we have to go back and do is look at some provisions came out, like the required doctor's note to prove you're disabled. That provision came out, but then other bad provisions came in, such as a provision that is so broadly written, it would make a lot of the activities that churches did during 2020 to get their 65 plus parishioners able to vote by mail, passing out that application would make, under the plain language of the bill, again, many people say it doesn't do this, but it does. The plain language is there. Many attorneys have looked at it. It would make distributing mail-in ballot applications and make you a felon just for distributing those things if you had a position on ballot measures and things like that. So some bad provisions out, more bad provisions in. It's a moving target. Part of why we don't have a nice one-pager for you explaining it is because these bills are changing on a daily basis, and we're trying to keep up with those changes and bring them to you.
So help me remember that. So the Senate bill passed the full Senate at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
I thought it was 6 a.m.
Oh, if that could be true. I've lost all sense of time.
I know, it was way late.
9 hours. Passed Wednesday night, Thursday morning, and then a couple hours later, the House kicked off a 22-hour hearing.
That's right. So I think I believe it passed, or well, you're right. I've lost all track of time, but we'll say within 2 or 3 hours after the Senate passed Senate Bill 7 Thursday morning, the House began their committee hearing and House Elections Committee on House Bill 6, which is the other big omnibus, multi-page voter suppression bill. They began their hearing on it just a matter of hours later at 8 a.m. for a committee hearing that then lasted until, I think that one did last until 6 a.m. if I'm remembering right. So I may have that. Anyway, it was another late night. So needless to say, we were all very tired this weekend. So that hearing went until 6 a.m. And just like the Senate version, it's been a bit of a moving target where there's a brand new committee substitute. Some provisions are changed, some provisions are out, some provisions, bad provisions are in. It's just a constantly moving target, almost like spaghetti on a wall, trying to see which ones stick. It's looking, this bill also has that provision about vote harvesting in it that is extremely broadly written. We don't know what quote, and this is the language of the bill, we don't know what direct interaction in the presence of a voter, like what actions constitute that. The Attorney General's office has one read on it. We read it like the NAACP reads it, which is that it could absolutely involve otherwise legal behavior that we were doing. Churches were doing many. I know Scott helped organize churches to do this, to just pass out applications for ballot by mail to your parishioners that are 65 and older. So obviously they're eligible. Nothing wrong with that. Currently, it would make those things illegal. So again, on Thursday, I think the big news is it passed the Senate. It's over in the House. House Bill 6 could be voted out any day now. And then also on Thursday, the business community engaged in a big coordinated way. There's an over-under bet on how many war metaphors I use. When the business community engaged, they engaged in a coordinated way. You had former Speaker Strauss come out against these bills, a Republican speaker come out against these bills. A current member of the legislature, Representative Lyle Larson, came out against these bills. And then you had American Airlines, Dell, and there's a long list that I am not able to rattle off, but we can all find them. The business community is beginning to mobilize. And, I will say, as an observer who's been doing this in the state policy, I should say, in Texas for about 15 years, yeah, it really felt like you were in a foxhole. Here's metaphor number one, Scott. It really felt like you were in a foxhole. And somewhere above the tree canopy, you heard the jets coming in. So it was very nice to hear those metaphorical jet engines coming in. What does that mean in reality? It means that this felt a lot more, previous to Thursday, it felt a lot like the voter ID fights that we have ever been in about 10 years ago. But when that happened, when the business community moved, it felt much more like the bathroom bill. And some of you will remember the bathroom bill and how the business community engaged and a lot of establishment groups, churches engaged. It felt a lot more like the bathroom bill than the voter ID fights, which are extremely difficult, but possible to maybe slow some of these things up and make them less bad along the way. It's going to be, this is going to be the thing that we're hearing about for the rest of session, and perhaps into special sessions. That's really out of our hands. But if we do our jobs right, we're going to make more work for ourselves. So that's the goal, is to make this like the bathroom bill. And if you're tired of hearing about voting rights, sorry, that's what we're going to be doing. That's what's for dinner. That's the conversation we're having. It's critical to democracy. Voting, of course, is the right that is preservative of all other rights. If you care about Medicaid expansion, it depends on your right to vote. If you care about George Floyd legislation, depends on your right to vote. If it doesn't, I mean, just name the issue you care about, payday lending, whatever it may be. It's all contingent on your right to go to the ballot box and express your wishes, and to have legislators that are responsive to the voters, not legislators that are picking which voters they want to hear from and which voters they don't want to hear from. We are having a great big conversation that we've not had as a country since we really and truly became a multiracial democracy in 1965. We're having one of those once in a generation conversations about what does it mean to be an American citizen? What does it mean to be a democracy? What does it mean to be able to express your wishes at the ballot box? And that's really where we're at. Now, I'm a little bit concerned. The good news is the business community engaged. The bad news is that the American people are not where we need them to be yet. I saw polling just over the weekend that said most independents are checked out on this. And when you ask them about it, they're like, oh yeah, both sides cheat. And they're engaging in a false equivalency that is simply not the reality of what we are seeing in the plain text of these bills. We are reading and analyzing these bills, and what we're seeing is something much more threatening to democracy than what I think most people are perceiving, at least at a public policy polling level. So that's a big concern that I have. I think a great big question is, how does this affect the rest of session and how does it play out? And boy, nobody knows for sure, but there are some real policy things that the legislature is yet to do. The biggest is the budget. It always is. They have not passed a budget. Another huge, super big one is the electric grid. What do they really plan to do in fixing the electric grid? And of course, that is a thing the business community is deeply concerned with. The whole idea of a Texas miracle, the whole idea of this being a business-friendly climate, business took huge losses. Obviously the loss of life is the first and foremost concern of what happened in the Texas blackouts, but there was a huge economic cost to the Texas blackouts as well. And so what does the House, and unfortunately we're looking more and more at the House for leadership once again, what does this new House with the new speaker, what is the new House? Is the new House going to be fundamentally different than the way it's been for the last decade? The last decade, it's been the bastion of serious and responsible policy. Does the House engage in that way again is a big open question we're still looking at. And do they engage and fix the electric grid the way that most voters want them to, or do they just get tired of hearing from certain voters and make them not able to vote? So so the big question here is timing. Whenever these voting bills, if and when these voting bills hit the House floor, there will be partisan theatrics of an existential nature, because it really does affect elected officials in an existential way. And a lot of the House does not remember the voter ID fights. A lot of the House certainly doesn't remember the redistricting, mid-decade redistricting fights of 2003. That's what we're building up to, is a 2003 when the Democrats went to Oklahoma, 2009 when there was a voter ID bill, there was a great big chub. And for those of you who don't know the parliamentary phrases like that, jargon like that, in 2009, there was a local and consent calendar, which is supposed to be the non-controversial bills. And they're supposed to knock these non-controversial bills out in a matter of hours. And there's usually dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of bills on these local and consent calendars that just fly through because nobody has opposition to them. Well, one of the things that happened in 2009 was legislators wrote, so under the House rules, if somebody speaks for 10 minutes on one of these bills, it knocks the bill off local and consent and effectively kind of kills that bill or sends it back to committee. What legislators did is they would ask 9.5 minutes of questions of the bill author, and then they let the bill through. And they did that to then slow this local and consent calendar down. So what normally takes 2 hours took 3.5 days. And that's the kind of slowdown that we did. There were all sorts of parliamentary tactics like that to slow things down and grind the legislature to a screeching halt. That's the level of existential that these bills will represent. And so that I go into that detail to say, we're not sure what House leadership's plan is, but you can, rest assured that it will be that kind of disruptive thing where once these bills hit the floor, the rest of the session is pretty much going to be spent because everybody's going to be angry at one another. And we haven't even talked about redistricting that they have to do whenever they do that. So that's what we're building up towards. That's why we're going to be talking about it for the next 2 months.
So I'll note that there are, as of right now, 55 days, 11 hours, and 16 minutes left in the Texas legislative session. And 5 days left this week that we're going to be watching the legislature. So what are you going to be watching this week, Josh?
Well, we have a kind of a redo, coming up in House elections. That is going to be the main focal point of the action alert when we release it coming up here in a little bit. I'll give you a preview of it. There are 16 bills in the House Elections Committee. Anywhere from 10 to a dozen are not good. And we are still deciding which ones we're going to oppose and oppose how vigorously, but let me give you some sneak previews of what these bills are. There's one bill that would be a Secretary of State takeover of the voter registration system in the state. So voter registration is done at a county level. It is monitored and kind of checked and balanced by the Secretary of State, but the Secretary of State is not the primary. They have an oversight role, not an administrative role. This is a terrible bill because there's a complete lack of trust in the Secretary of State's office due to a voter purge that was tried and failed in 2019. And when I say, I should just say botched, because frankly, it was botched. There were 100,000 citizens who were new citizens. They were naturalized. They had become citizens that were eligible to vote. But the Secretary of State then sent a demand letter to counties saying, you have non-citizens on your voter rolls who are not eligible to vote, remove them. And the counties responded and said, no, they're absolutely eligible. Your data is bad. And the counties were correct. It was the Secretary of State that just botched it. So there was an attempt to remove 100,000 citizens from the voter rolls that fortunately was stopped. But if you make the Secretary of State the voter registrar, there's no check and balance on that. They never, it would have been, these citizens would have been disenfranchised instantly, and it would have been a disaster for that next election cycle while you try to get these otherwise eligible voters back eligible again. That's just one instance of why we have some distrust in the Secretary of State's office. A second reason is because in January of 2020, they did strike some names from the rolls, and we have no idea how many. But we know this happened because it happened to one of Texas Impact's employees. At that time, one of our employees was a LBJ school student. And so she had voted with no problem in the 2018 general election. But when she went to vote in the 2020 primary, the Travis County came back saying she's not eligible to vote. And when we looked into it, we then pressed Travis County for why. And they said, you need to take it up with the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State in January of 2020 has switched her registration back to Hidalgo County, where she's from, for reasons that are completely unclear. She was a registered voter in Hidalgo County in 2016, but then was a college student and switched it in 2018 and renewed it when she moved, moved residences, as college kids are so prone to do. And the Secretary of State's office switched it back to Hidalgo County, which effectively disenfranchised her because she couldn't get back to go vote in Hidalgo County. So we don't have a lot of confidence in the Secretary of State's ability to do this. And that's what this bill would do, is put them primarily in charge of centralized voter registration in their office. And they have not proven to be able to effectively do this for at least the last 2 years. There's another bill that would risk felony prosecutions for any false information provided on a voter registration form. The problem with that is that any false information can be as simple as a data or a clerical error. I can't read the handwriting, so I put it in wrong. And then you're having a conversation about whether or not this person's bad handwriting is felonious. That we're going to have to work on that one a bit. You have another bill, a third bill, that would be photo ID for mail-in ballots and for mail-in ballot applications. You would have to then find a printer or a scanner, scan your ID, and submit that with your paperwork both times. Again, that's going to be really hard for elderly people who can't just get in a car and run to Kinko's, and who may not have even had a driver's license for 20 years. So that's going to be really adversely affecting them. You have a fourth bill that would shorten the ballot receipt deadline. So we did a study where we open record requested the number of accepted and rejected ballots for the last 3 election cycles from the 30 largest counties. We found the ballot rejection rate was about 1.6%. And the overwhelming majority of these were because the ballot arrived late. The mail got it there late, frankly. And when I say majority, I mean like 86%, 85% in Barron, Harris County. I can't remember which one was which, but one was 86, one was 85. In Fort Bend County at 68%. So you're talking 2/3 to 3/4 or 4/5. I mean, these are big chunks, are simply rejected because they show up late. What this bill does is, instead of extending the ballot receipt deadline to count otherwise valid votes, it would shorten the ballot receipt deadline to the last day of early voting. So you'd have 4 less days to get your ballot there. So we'll be having more conversations about that bill. You have a fifth bill, actually a fifth and a sixth. We'll just go ahead and lump these 2 ideas together. So that provision I was talking about that went into Senate Bill 7, that is in House Bill 6, there's a standalone bill with this very vague language, vague at best. And I think if it was applied to us, it'd be unconstitutionally overbroad. It's the paid vote harvesting thing we just talked about, where we don't know what direct interaction in the presence of a voter means. So if the University Presbyterian Church, which did this, sent out applications to their members, to parishioners who were 65 plus, they often hand delivered some of those just to make sure that it got there to that person. Plus, it was just a good reason to check in on shut-ins and elderly people in a pandemic. If I hand you that application, does that meet the definition in your statute? Do I need to slide it under the door and pretend like we never talked? Is that permissible? Is it okay to send it to you in the mail? But if I call you and make sure you got it, is that direct interaction? So, I mean, we have a lot of questions about the application of this very vague language. That's a bill coming up. Then you have another bill that's even worse. It just straight up says that no person can distribute an application for a ballot by mail. So the whole project would be criminal under this bill. And then you have another bill, I think this is up to 7 now, that is messing around with signature verification requirements. So this bill wants to be able to go back and look at your driver's license in addition to your application, in addition to your registration. Okay, but here's the main thing. Is there going to be an opportunity to cure? If some ballot board thinks your signature looks off, and let's be real, The medication you took can affect your handwriting. Any medical condition can affect your handwriting. Age affects your handwriting. My 98-year-old grandfather, I can show you 20 years worth of birthday cards because I like to keep them, where his signature has evolved with time. And if they're going back 20 years looking at a driver's license, it's not going to look the same. Is there an opportunity for the voter to come cure it? If a ballot board says nope, does the voter get notice? Can the voter then say, wait a minute, I will come down there in person to prove my identity because you doubt it? Again, there's no law in Texas, as there is in many other states, that allows you to cure such things. And if you're really serious about security, which is what the whole argument comes down to, if you're really serious about integrity, having an opportunity to cure reduces the number of questionable ballots that you have to go back and investigate. So if you got and we're talking dozens, right? I mean, even in the largest counties, there's not more than a couple hundred of these every election cycle, and that's at a general election cycle. If you got a couple hundred of these things, having people come back in, and not only does their vote count, but then it takes the number of questionable ballots and reduces that number, which obviously saves the number of investigatory hours that the AG's office or a county would have to go and investigate these things as well. So it actually would increase the security of the ballot to then provide greater access through an opportunity and enfranchise people through an opportunity to cure. So anyway, that is, again, the breadth of issues that we're looking at coming up in House elections next week. And I'll just say that, I mean, any of these bills are, in a normal legislative session, you would enter into a bill negotiation. Bill negotiations are routine, but it is super hard to trust the negotiation process when these bills are so hyper-partisan and being driven, frankly, they're not being driven by data. There is no data that this is a problem. There's no substantial data that this is a problem. They find one or two anecdotes of a weird irregularity and make it into a big systemic issue. No, that's not good data analysis. This is QAnon conspiracy thinking that is driving the legislature. And, you wish legislators would exercise their own judgment, but frankly, that's not how we designed the system. We designed them to see which way the wind's blowing. And so what they are hearing is a well-motivated minority constituency that can adversely affect them in a primary, saying, this is an issue, you got to fix it. This is an issue, you got to fix it. Well, it's not an issue, but we have alternating, competing realities. And then the other big problem is a process problem too. It's hard to trust the negotiation process when one of these bills hits the floor and then becomes a Christmas tree for all the other ideas. And you completely lose control of the bill on the floor. This happened with a recent example is the Sanctuary Cities bill, where they were trying to have a tightly constrained bill, and then they hit the floor, and then you had a political amendment come on, and everybody ran scared, and it turned into a much more draconian bill on the House floor because they lost control of it on the floor. So you have all these things that make this not just a normal bill negotiation that is so routine. So the top line of the action alert is going to be voting rights, if you can't tell. Senate Bill 7, House Bill 6. No to those bills. And then a huge list of new bills that we're still figuring out which ones are going to be on the list.
And so a couple questions in the chat about bill numbers. So Dave's just keeping out for that action alert this afternoon or soon.
Yeah, stay tuned. I mean, we got to talk as a staff about which ones we're going to put on the list. But there will be bill numbers in the action alert.
And that we did get a lot of really good feedback from y'all last week when you were making those telephone calls, which has helped shape how we're going to organize those calls moving forward. For those who are on the rapid response list last week, you should have received an update to the original action alert that went out last week, and that was based on the telephone calls that you all were making. So please continue to send that feedback to us as you have it. We've talked a lot about voting today, and I mentioned at the top that that Texas Impact will be sponsoring an event at the Capitol this Wednesday from 11 o'clock until 2 o'clock. And I know people are in different places in terms of where you are with vaccinations and being comfortable being around groups of people. And so we certainly understand that and will not press people to do anything that you're uncomfortable with. And so we have a couple of different options for Texans of Faith to respond in similar ways to how the business community has over the course of the last week. As we mentioned, we will be gathering a group this Wednesday, April 7th, beginning at 11 o'clock at the Capitol. We have a Facebook page up giving instructions about that, but you can find all of the information at texasimpact.org/elections. For those who aren't able or aren't willing to come to the Capitol on Wednesday, we also have a sign-on letter for Texans of Faith to oppose voter suppression bills like the ones Josh has mentioned. And so we encourage you to sign that. We encourage you to find as many people as you can to sign that letter, especially between now and Wednesday. We plan on launching that letter on Wednesday, but I'd love if we had 1,000 or more people already signed on before Wednesday. So help us hit that number or many, many more. So please sign and share that letter. We're also looking for Texas faith leaders who will speak out at a press conference that day. If you or your clergy person would be interested in that, please reach out to me directly at scott@texasimpact.org. And we'll try to get that organized. But a lot going on this Wednesday, a lot going on over the course of the week. We need Texans of Faith to stand united in opposition to these voter suppression bills, and we have some tools to help you do that. Anything you want to add on that, Joshua Houston?
Yeah, I might even press a little bit. I know we said we wouldn't press people who weren't comfortable, but you're all adults. What I'm hearing and seeing in the Capitol is the proponents of these measures know that their opposition is afraid to enter the building. They are not even enforcing masks in these tight committee rooms. I have my own theory. I shouldn't say it. Let's just say that as a fact. That's what they're doing. And they're moving quickly. They're moving very quickly on controversial. So in a normal session, you move the non-controversial, then you get to the controversial. They've inverted that because they know with time, more and more will become vaccinated. So they're moving quick before people are really comfortable being in the building. That's also led to a number of friendly legislators saying, where is everybody? This is very demoralizing. It's hard to block and fight these things when people aren't showing up. So to the extent that and again, Scott's right, your own personal health is your own personal calculation. But I would just encourage that if you were ever going to take a risk, the issue of voting rights is the thing that I have personally chosen to take risks on because it is so fundamental to everything else. So to the extent you can and are able and are vaccinated or are just willing to take a risk, now is unfortunately the time we got to mobilize.
And I will plan on being there, so I'll look forward to seeing some of your faces there, and look forward to seeing all of your names on the sign-on letter when I look later this week. For those who can't make it to town, we will be broadcasting via Facebook Live, so please make sure that you share that content with your folks, and we're asking people to tag their legislators in that on Facebook or Twitter or other social media. Josh, anything to add before we close out today?
No.
All right. Well, y'all really do appreciate, Josh, first of all, thanks to you for the time and the work that you've been doing, all of those late nights up at the Capitol. Everyone else, thank you all so much for tuning in today. We do have some important work to do over the course of this week and the weeks to come to make sure that democracy is protected. We need the Texas faith community to make a strong statement, and we've talked about the resources to do that. We also have other tools we mention every week. As a reminder, if you're not part of the rapid response team, please join that so you can get updated action alerts and calls to action throughout the course of the week, and join a legislative engagement group so you can be paired up with other people in your legislative district to build a relationship with your legislator and have these important conversations. If you have questions about any of this, you can reach out to me at scott@texasimpact.org. And remember, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the work of the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregation are members by going to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, this will be a busy week. Keep your eye on Texas Impact social media and make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Texas Impact Weekly Witness podcast in your favorite podcast source and our YouTube channel. Friends, now is the time for congregations to be active and engaged. So let's get to work.